the first step is for men to become conscious and aware of them having privilege, and then to become educated about the benefits that flow from having that privilege, and then to become aware about how those benefits which they gain through privilege involves them in some level of complicity with forms of gender inequality. So I think there's an educational role to play, to engage men, to think and reflect on their privilege, to become more aware of the benefits they get out of it, and start to face the very difficult and sometimes painful and discomforting task of beginning to explore their own complicity. That's in the short term. In the longer term, I think we have to really transform the structures of inequality. We really need to have high levels of equality at all throughout society, from the household to men doing their fair share of domestic work and childcare, through to equal representation of women in parliament and in government and on boards, and need to break down the gender division of labour. We need to look at the media and the way in which male values are promoted and exalted, and female values are marginalised. So we need to see a dramatic transformation of all sorts of structures of inequality in our society. And emergency management organisations would start to mirror that as well. We'd see a greater representation of women. We'd see a greater awareness of men of the importance of gender issues. We'd see a greater level of cognizance by men of their privilege in society more broadly. We'd see men and women working more equally in partnership with each other. We'd see men listening to women as they talk about their experiences and their concerns.
Almost 51% of the Australian population is women. They have got so much to offer, your organisation as they do mine. If they need time out, and it's not just to have children, it's time out to do something else with their lives. When they come back, if they've lost seniority, if they are travelling now months or years behind their peers, you are never going to realise that talent. So we've made a considerable adjustment to the way we have merit judged in our army, and it is to the long-term health of the organisation that the real advantages will accrue.
Well, one, we've got to actually champion it. One, we've got to make sure that the door is open for females, women to be part of these services. And there's examples where that's worked and worked extremely well. So I can take you to a fire brigade in the outer metropolitan area that has got a brigade management team that is greater than 50% dominated by females. Great experience. So that tells me that they've already opened the door up and have been able to see a diversity in gender come into the brigade. But there's other brigades across the state that are still male dominated. And if a female was to knock on the door, I'm not sure it'd be a welcoming open in the sense of the behaviour, the culture. So it goes back to that first experience. And I think the first experience is always the lasting experience. That is, if I walk in and it's dominated by a certain culture, I'll look and say, is it for me? And we've got to open the door and understand the way in which we are representing ourselves and presenting ourselves. My role is to actually make sure the agencies understand that. I can't change that overnight. It's got to be changed at the grassroots. So I think those at the community level, those at the emergency services level that are servicing their community need to understand that and understand it better. That's not a criticism, it's actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity of the future that people need to say, we need to be better at what we're doing. The data's there to say we're male dominated in most instances. Let's take that opportunity to be better, more diverse, open, about letting those others in that may not have been there before. It's a really important step. And it's not just about gender, it's about a diversity in community. You know, that we're still probably very dominant in certain profiles within some communities. Let's open those doors to have that diversity issue open to what we need. It's important for our future. It's really important for our future.
The middle level of any organisation is where the culture sits. Those people are the keepers of a culture, they're the cultural ambassadors. If you want change, that's the level you need to work at. So in terms of helping that group change, it's once again, I think, showing them that a different future, maybe to the one that they envisaged, is a future where they're going to not only play a part, but it's a future that's going to benefit everyone. Now, you do that once again either through the storytelling, either through changing the way people's performance is measured, through actually being quite strong about what behaviours are not tolerated. Because I go into so many organisations and they'll tell me, oh, gender equality is critical to this organisation. And I say, well, can I ask you, how many people have you exited because either they didn't reach their performance indicators around gender diversity, or they didn't exhibit behaviour which was aligned with that value, most organisations will tell me that that never happens. Well, there's your answer. If there's no action that's taken, if there are no consequences for not living the organisation's mantra around gender diversity, then people won't change. Absolutely. Take it out of the policy. That policy needs to be lived on the ground. And in fact, that's one of the things that I saw in my pregnancy inquiry and return to work. You're worse off in a large organisation, which is interesting. What that tells me is you can have the best policies in the world. If they're not being lived on the ground, then change won't happen and discrimination will still thrive.
I think it goes right to the way in which we recruit, the way in which we operate, the way in which we reward what we do. It's everything we do. It's not tokenism. It can't be tokenism. It's got to be reality. It's got to be something that's sustainable, and it's got to be an honest attempt to put structures in place that is inviting to all to participate.
We've had female firefighters since 1988, so for 27 years, I think that is, 25 years. Prior to that, there was no effect, absolutely no effect at all. Gender wasn't even factored in, whether it was around a station or whether it was when we actually acted in anger and went out to calls. I'm sure there were certain considerations, but they certainly weren't enshrined in any sort of policy or training. But now, since 1988, there's been a slow move towards proactive response to affect people more positively, as in men and women, together and separately. We work in a workplace that's unique insofar that we eat, sleep, wash and work there. So there has to be a consideration for gender. We have, as I said before, 64 out of our, almost 4% female firefighters in our workplace. And it's only recently, in the 2000s certainly, mid-2000s, that we've been looking at privacy issues, return to work conditions after maternity leave, say for instance. So there's been there certainly has been some consideration, but it's only been recently, and it's because of, by sheer weight of numbers. The more females we have in the fire service, the more onus there is on the organisation to actually change things. We've been able to instigate certainly some gender-friendly workplace changes, as I said before, in regards to privacy. And uniforms are a huge consideration as well, where once a female firefighter was thrown a male uniform and say, make do with that. I think there may be still sectors or parts of organisations where that still happens, but certainly in the MFB we've gone in leaps and bounds as far as tailor-made, fitting uniforms and areas for female and male, for what it's worth, to have privacy whenever they get changed and when they clean themselves and when they sleep.
There was a simple thing of the type of gear that was being issued. Look, if we're going to ask people to do something, let's make sure they're equipped properly. And here we had at one stage where, and it is a policy issue, that the gear, the clothing we're wearing, the gloves, the simple-to gloves, were structured around, the backdrop that it was for a male. That's not inclusion. That's actually very divisive in its own right. We need to respect and understand people and equip them appropriately. That's a really practical, but it's not the person at the grassroots can change that. That means leaders need to change things. Leaders need to change things to enable the grassroots to work effectively. That's our role. That's a leadership role in our area, and then we've got to apply it. That's only one example. There's many examples of where we've put restrictive things in place that it's either gender or even physically how I operate. Someone that's shorter, taller, someone that's got capabilities that have or haven't. So we've got to actually understand this diversity thing in the broader sense, but certainly diversification in gender is one of those.
I think this really comes down to, in terms of improving experiences, as to educate and talk about issues and the experiences of others. We can often respond to disaster incidents, and it's being aware of the impact it can have on our personnel that are attending incidents in particular. We have a lot of support for our members after critical incidents in particular, but it's also thinking about the impact that it'll have on their families and friends. Sometimes it's about talking about these issues, providing case studies of different experiences, because we'll all go through different experiences after disasters.
I think that you'll always get a little bit of polarisation amongst the men within the fire service when you try to put in policy changes, but when you make some structural changes that benefit both, regardless of gender, benefit all I should say, it's a win for the organisation. It's also a win for the firefighters as well.